boys and girls online, this is Kelly from Nice Lady Productions, and I'm really happy that you're joining me for this review of the sexy little beast, the Panasonic HC-X1000. This is a very thoughtful and beautifully designed prosumer camcorder from Panasonic. Physical built-in ND filters, focus assist, peaking, histogram, zebras, and just a lot of physical and analog buttons, including analog audio controls on the outside of the body. So you can set your shutter speed manually with this camera, as well as your iris, and you can set your gain, which is like your ISO. This little beast has 3 physical rings for adjusting your focus, zoom, and iris control, and they feel fantastic, and they're extremely responsive, but also have enough resistance built into them that you can zoom very nicely with this camera. The HC-X1000 has a built-in 20 times optical zoom lens made by Leica. So if we compare it to a 35mm equivalent zoom range, that's about a 30 to a 626mm zoom. And to illustrate that point, here's just what this camera can do regarding its zoom. Now keep in mind, I'm shooting this completely handheld, so sorry for some of the shaky footage. The camera does have 2 levels of built-in image stabilization, one for 4K and one for 1080p. That helps quite a lot. You know, people like changing lenses, but having such a long zoom on this, you really have a great range of shooting capabilities with this one 20 times optical zoom lens. The lens is very sharp. It is made by Leica, and it has this great zoom. But the unfortunate feature of this lens is that the aperture is not constant, it's variable. As you zoom in, the aperture changes from the fast f1.8 to f3.6, meaning as you zoom in, the exposure gets darker, and of course it impacts your image. Because the setting was so dark, I found the skin tones and also the dynamic range in this camera lacking. The one thing with the smaller sensor is you're going to likely have more grain in the image. Now, if you take a 4K video image and you put it on a 1080p timeline, you're going to subsample that image. And when you do, you're going to actually be making the grain smaller because you make the image smaller when you output it. I always shoot all my cameras in manual mode, but I thought I would see what this camera thinks it should do in such a dark setting. I feel like the Panasonic HC-X1000 is a kind of camera that you should light for. Really, the best image you're going to get out of this camera is at 0 dB gain, and gain is basically like ISO. The camera has a really cool recessed 3.5-inch LCD touchscreen that has 1.1 million dots and a 1.2 million dot viewfinder that also flips up and has a diopter built in. It has 2 XLR ports and physical analog audio controls on the side of the camera, and also provide phantom power to any mics that you have plugged in there. So the HC-X1000 really offers a lot of features. You buy this camera, rent it, you're really going to want to go online and look at their online guide for this camera, because there's so many menu settings and ways that you can change the picture slightly, and gamma settings, and so many options that you really want to read the more thorough guide than the getting started guide they send with the camera. If you want to shoot the 4K with this camera, you want to use the SDHC cards that have the 3 rating for 4K footage. You have 2 card slots. You can shoot simultaneously the same image on each. You can shoot one and then have it relay over to the next card slot, so you have double the amount of storage. And the third cool feature is it has background recording. So while you're shooting video, if at any point you want to take a photograph, you can while you're shooting video, and it will record those photographs onto the second card. This camera also has Wi-Fi connectivity, and it has a host USB so that you can stream the footage out of this camera while you're recording it. I love that the touch screen is recessed into the camera. You just pull it out and flip it around. I found that really handy. I also like that it sits up a little higher on the camera so that you can put the camera on your shoulder easily and have the screen right in front of you. You're going to have the same framing with this camera whether you're shooting 1080p or 4K because it is using the two Venus engines. I love to be able to shoot in 4K and view it on my 4K TV. The human eye is just amazing. It can see so much dynamic range, which looks lifelike. You know, when you have a dark object and you have a really bright object, there isn't this like quick fall off between those things. It's gradual. I didn't find anywhere where they'd actually rated the dynamic range of this camera. I did see some mention online of it being 9 stops of dynamic range, which is not a very high number. The most dynamic range I could get out of this camera was when I was shooting it in the cinema picture style with the cinema gamma. Now you can see that around the sun, the image starts to fall apart a bit. It goes from really, really bright and then it clips. This is a sign of the camera lacking a bit of dynamic range. So there's a lot of options with this camera. I think it's going to be a very popular camera for people who are first starting out to shoot 4K. Certainly at this point in time in history, I would say if there's something really important to you that you're shooting, you should be thinking about shooting it in 4K. I certainly am. You can see that zoom here again in this incredible waterfall. This camera shoots at cinema 4K at 100 megabytes per second, and it goes up to 150 megabytes per second in UHD at 60 frames per second. So it does 60, 30, and 24 frames per second. It does cinema 4K at 24 frames per second. It does 1080p at 60 frames per second at 200 megabytes. The camera really feels nice in the hand. It is smaller than a lot of prosumer cameras. I would say that it has a better build quality than a lot of prosumer cameras out there. Panasonic really thought about this camera. It has so many options and menu options and so many great features like zebra patterns, color bars, histogram, focus peaking. You can do white balance. You have 3000K, 5500 auto, and of course a manual white balance with this camera that you can program in. So there's a lot to love about this camera, and I think that Panasonic is really on a good path with it. I wish that it had more dynamic range. I wish that it performed better in low light settings and had more natural skin tones. But you certainly have a lot of options in the menu to fine-tune the look. So that's it for me. I hope you learned something. Please subscribe to my channel, like, dislike, comment on my videos, and stay tuned for more of these coming at you.